Claressa Shields is either running the greatest attention operation in women's boxing right now, or she is walking blindfolded straight off a cliff. And by the time this breakdown is done, you are going to know exactly which one it is. And listen, before we go 1 inch further, I hope everybody out there watching is doing well, because for the loud, unbothered types we are about to unpack today, you are going to want to buckle in. Happy weekend, seriously, I hope your day is going better than the timeline right now, because what is unfolding around Claressa Shields, Papoose, and Remy Ma has quietly become the strangest storyline in combat sports, and it is only getting louder. So do me one favor before this thing really takes off. Tap that like button, hit subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling me where you stand, because I want the numbers on this one loud. I want the algorithm to see that people are paying attention, because the mainstream sports desks are pretending this whole situation is not happening, and somebody has to say it out loud. Once you see what Claressa Shields did this week, and once you see the receipts stacking up against the entire narrative she is trying to sell, you are going to understand why this story is not going away no matter how many people beg for it to disappear. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable, because Claressa Shields has always been loud, and Claressa Shields has always been proud, and honestly, that is part of what made Claressa Shields the two-time Olympic gold medalist and undisputed champion the sport needed. But somewhere along the road between the Alicia Baumgardner shouting matches, the MVP Promotions lawsuit talk, and the very public arrival of Papoose in her life, Claressa Shields stopped being the story and Papoose started being the story, and the ratio has never recovered. That is the shift nobody in her camp seems willing to admit, and that is the shift the cheerleading section clapping for her refuses to see. Look, I am not here to tear anybody down. I am here to tell you what the receipts are actually showing, because Claressa Shields tweeted something this week that reset the entire conversation, and once you read it, you cannot unread it. All I do is train hard and go home and my hubby massage my legs and my back. That was the tweet. That was the phrasing. And when Claressa Shields wrote the word hubby, the person she was talking about is a man who, as of every public record anyone has been able to verify, is still legally married to Remy Ma. And that is not a rumor. That is not a hot take. That is a matter of paperwork that has not moved. See, this is what I have started calling the Hubby Headline Machine, because every single week, Claressa Shields drops one more line, one more caption, one more clapback, and each one is calibrated to keep the same 3 names trending together. Claressa Shields, Papoose, Remy Ma. The cycle is so predictable now that you could set a stopwatch by it. And people online have absolutely noticed. Do y'all hear yourselves when you call this black love and healthy energy? Because that is not what the paperwork says. That is not what the timeline says. And it is definitely not what the fans in the comments are saying. Now some folks want to argue that Papoose has no real incentive to change any of this, because if the machine is feeding him attention for free, why on earth would he go anywhere near a lawyer? That is one theory floating around. Others believe the silence from him is louder than any statement he could put out, because if Claressa Shields is truly telling the truth about the situation, then a simple public confirmation would end the entire debate in one afternoon. But that afternoon never comes. That confirmation never lands. And the Hubby Headline Machine keeps running. And here is the moment that made even the most patient fans stop and stare. Somebody replied to Claressa Shields online reminding her that Papoose is still Remy Ma's husband. And Claressa Shields fired back with 4 words. But he's with me. 4 words. Just 4. And it was over. Because those 4 words did more damage to the sympathetic version of this story than any critic ever could. Those 4 words shifted her from the woman in love to the woman in the headline. And once you shift that far, you do not shift back easily. Basement of the basement stuff, honestly. Because now stack that quote against the earlier interview where Claressa Shields said she does not spend every day with Papoose, and the 2 statements start pulling in opposite directions. He is with her, but not every day. He is her hubby, but the paperwork on the other marriage has not moved. He massages her back after training, but he lives inside a marriage that legally has not been dissolved. Every single one of those threads pulls tighter, and every single one of them yanks a new wave of comments back into the timeline. That is not by accident. That is design. And look, I have gone on record calling out other women in the game. I called out Latto over her rumored situation. So nobody watching this can accuse me of playing favorites. The difference, in my honest opinion, is that Latto has generally kept the whole thing in a quieter lane. She is not printing captions about it every 7 days. She is not turning it into a promotional cycle. The energy is completely different, and pretending it is the same is intellectually dishonest. Because here is the receipt nobody wants to talk about. Claressa Shields has an August 15th fight on the calendar. That fight was supposed to be the story. That fight was supposed to be the noise. That fight was supposed to be the reason her name was trending. But instead, the noise around her is Papoose, 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 and more Papoose. And critics are asking a fair question. Is the fight card underwhelming enough that the personal drama had to be turned up to fill the gap? Because when you look at her opponent's actual professional experience, and when you compare that experience to the elite-level talk Claressa Shields has built her entire persona around, the numbers do not match the microphone. They just do not. And now, here is the darker layer because it is not all light content and Twitter clapbacks. This is where the concern actually enters the chat. Claressa Shields has told her audience for years that being publicly embarrassed in a relationship is one of her biggest fears. She has said it in podcasts. She has said it in interviews. She has said it in throwaway lines that people never forgot. And every time criticism hits her online, every time a video like this one lands in her algorithm, everyone can see how deeply it lands. She reacts. She replies. She subtweets. She engages. That is a woman who feels every word. So the question becomes, what happens if the reality does not land the way she has been advertising it? Because right now Claressa Shields is planted firmly in the belief that a divorce is coming, that the paperwork is coming, that the future is settled. She said it. She keeps saying it. She said she does not handle things in the courts, she does not handle things in the law, and yet almost 2 years later, the entire situation is stuck exactly where it started. How many more months does anybody expect this to sit in the same place? Because time does not stop for anyone. Not for Claressa Shields. Not for Papoose. Not for Remy Ma. Not for the fight card. Time keeps moving, and the situation keeps aging in real time, and every new caption ages it a little harder. And listen, chatter about Remy Ma keeps circling too, because people remember. People remember when Papoose looked genuinely emotional during the whole Remy Ma and Easy the Block Captain public moment. People saw that reaction. People logged that reaction. And then people compared it to how quiet Papoose has been through this current chapter, and the contrast is not a small one. Some fans call the comparison unfair. Others call it damning. But either way, the comparison is there, and it is not going to erase itself just because Claressa Shields wants the conversation to move on. And then there is the older stuff, the whispers that never fully died. Some critics claim Claressa Shields used to interact warmly with Remy Ma on social media in years past, calling her sis, engaging with her posts, showing love publicly, while allegedly having private conversations with Papoose behind the scenes. Now, I am not the judge. I am not the jury. And nobody outside that circle knows what actually happened. But the receipts get pulled up every single time this conversation restarts, and every single time they refuse to die, and that is why so much of the audience is standing back with folded arms instead of throwing rose petals at this romance the way the cheerleading section wants them to. Now here is where things get even messier, because Claressa Shields has publicly referred to Papoose's daughter as her stepdaughter. Publicly. In writing. And critics are asking a very direct question. If the legal family structure has not changed, if the previous marriage has not been formally dissolved, then what exactly is that word doing in that sentence? Because words carry weight. Titles carry weight. Especially titles involving children. That is not a small detail to hand out casually. And the internet has not let that slide. And then, of course, the parasocial cheerleading section clapping for her keeps yelling from the sidelines. You look so cute together. This is black love. Y'all are goals. Sis, keep going. And I understand the instinct. I really do. People want to see love win. People want to see a champion get her happy ending. But cheering someone through a decision without ever asking a single honest question is not support. It is applause with the volume turned up so loud that the person on stage cannot hear the fire alarm. And there is a fire alarm here. There genuinely is. Because let us zoom out for 1 second. If Claressa Shields is right, and the divorce is on the way, and the paperwork is being handled quietly, and the family transition is real, then great. Wonderful. Nobody has to eat their words harder than the critics. and nobody would be happier to eat those words than the fans who genuinely want the best for her. But if Claressa Shields is wrong, if the situation stays exactly where it is, if the paperwork keeps not moving, if the hubby label keeps not becoming legally accurate, then she has publicly, loudly, and permanently attached her name to a storyline that could unravel on camera with millions of witnesses. That is the risk. That is the real risk. And nobody in her circle seems willing to say it to her face. And to Papoose specifically, because the internet is watching Papoose the same way it is watching Claressa Shields, the message from the audience is simple. Silence is a choice. Ambiguity is a choice. Letting your name sit in the middle of two women's public conversations for years without ever clarifying a thing is a choice. And every choice has a bill that eventually comes due. If there are children in either household reading these posts, seeing these captions, hearing these interviews, then the responsibility level is not casual. It is not entertainment. It is not a talking point. It is real. Now some people will say I am being dramatic. That is fine. Some people will say the concern is overblown. That is fine too. But save this video. Come back to it in 3 months. Come back to it after August 15th. Come back to it when the next caption drops, because the next caption is coming, and the one after that is coming, and the machine is not stopping. That is not a prediction. That is just how the pattern has worked for 2 straight years. Look at it this way. Every time another controversy pops up around Claressa Shields, whether it is a sponsorship situation, a promotional dispute, an awards conversation, a fan reaction thread, or a straight-up press conference clip, somehow the conversation always finds its way back to Papoose. Always. And whether that is intentional or whether the algorithm just does what algorithms do, the outcome is identical. The boxing headline becomes the relationship headline. The sport becomes the sideshow. And the fight, the actual fight, the reason her name should be trending, gets pushed further down the page. That is why so many longtime fans are exhausted right now. Not angry, not hateful, just exhausted. Because they showed up to watch a generational women's boxing career, and instead they are being asked to weigh in on a marriage that is not theirs, a household that is not theirs, and a paperwork situation that has never been theirs to comment on. And every time they try to bring the conversation back to the sport, another caption drops, another quote surfaces, another timeline gets stitched together, and the sport gets buried under the noise all over again. And think about this for 1 second, because the pattern gets even louder when you zoom out on the platform behavior. Claressa Shields does not just post once and disappear. Claressa Shields posts, then reads the replies, then quote tweets the loudest critic, then screenshots the loudest supporter, then goes live, then goes silent for 6 hours, then returns with another caption that reopens the entire cycle from scratch. That is not accidental behavior. That is a broadcast pattern. And a broadcast pattern needs listeners, which means every single person clicking, commenting, and quoting is feeding the exact machine they claim to be exhausted by. That is the loop nobody wants to name out loud, but the loop is right there in plain sight for anyone paying attention. And Remy Ma, through all of this, has stayed largely quiet. Think about how loud Remy Ma normally is on a microphone. Think about how sharp Remy Ma is when a bar needs to be delivered. Think about the fact that Remy Ma has built an entire career on refusing to swallow a shot without returning fire. And yet, on this specific situation, Remy Ma has kept most of her powder dry, and that silence carries its own weight. Some people say Remy Ma is being classy. Some people say Remy Ma is waiting for the right moment. Some people say Remy Ma is simply refusing to hand this story any more oxygen than it already has. Whatever the reason, the contrast between the loudness of one camp and the stillness of the other camp tells a story all by itself. And here is another layer critics keep circling back to. When Claressa Shields was going after Alicia Baumgardner, when Claressa Shields was talking about suing MVP promotions, when Claressa Shields was demanding accountability on every front, she said very clearly that she does not handle her business in courtrooms and she does not settle her issues with lawyers. Fine. That is her stated philosophy. But if that is the stated philosophy, then how exactly is the paperwork on this current situation supposed to move? Because divorces do not finalize themselves through tweets. Divorces do not conclude in the comment section. Divorces require the very legal system that Claressa Shields has publicly said she avoids. That contradiction has not been resolved, and every time somebody in her replies points it out, the conversation shifts sideways instead of forward. That is a red flag the cheerleading section keeps pretending does not exist. Now here is the part the noisemakers will not tell you. Claressa Shields is an intelligent woman. She reads. She scrolls. She sees the comments. She knows exactly how the numbers are moving. So when she tweets hubby, when she fires back with, but he's with me, when she claps at critics in real time, she is aware of the reaction that is coming. That is not a woman being caught off guard. That is a woman driving the wheel. Whether she is driving the wheel toward vindication or toward a crash, that part is not settled yet. But the wheel is in her hands and nobody else's. And that is where the deepest concern actually sits. Because if Claressa Shields is emotionally invested in a version of the future that reality does not deliver, the landing is going to be hard. Really hard. Not stage drama hard. Real hard. And no championship belt in the world softens that kind of landing when it arrives on public timelines with millions of people watching in real time. That is why people who genuinely care about her, not the cheerleaders, not the noisemakers, the actual people, keep quietly asking who around her is willing to speak plainly before the situation writes its own ending. Because here is the truth about fame and the truth about titles and the truth about undefeated records. None of it protects anyone from the private wreckage of a public relationship gone sideways. History has shown that 1,000 times over. A person can be at the top of their sport, at the top of their bank account, at the top of every ranking list on earth, and still be quietly holding pain that nobody around them is honest enough to name. That is why real support is not applause. Real support is a hard conversation held in private before the world starts holding it in public. And to Papoose one more time. People are watching, really watching. If the situation escalates, if the paperwork surfaces messy, if the two households ever collide on camera, the fallout does not just land on the adults involved. It lands on everyone in the frame. Children, extended family, long-standing careers, business relationships, everything. That is a lot to carry for a caption. That is a lot to gamble for a headline cycle. And the audience is going to remember which choices were made this year and which ones were avoided. Now, some critics will say all of this is coming from a place of judgment. I want to be very clear about that. It is not. This is coming from a place of pattern recognition. When the same storyline plays out the same way week after week, for 2 straight years, with the same escalating captions and the same defensive replies, that is not gossip. That is data. And data, unlike gossip, does not vanish just because the subject of the data wants it to. So where does that leave the fight? Where does that leave August 15th? Where does that leave the belts, the tour, the promotional deals, the entire empire Claressa Shields has actually built with her fists? Honestly, it leaves all of it hanging on whether the story can be dragged back to the sport before the machine buries it completely. Because the boxing greatness is real. Nobody is disputing the boxing greatness. The resume is a resume. The medals are medals. The knockouts are knockouts. But greatness does not defend itself. Greatness has to be spoken about, marketed, sold, and pushed, and right now the microphone in front of her is being aimed at everything except her sport. The mask has slipped. That is really what it comes down to. The mask has slipped, and every new caption slips it a little further. The mask that says this is casual. The mask that says the criticism does not land. The mask that says everything is under control. Once you see the tweets, once you see the replies, once you see the stepdaughter label, once you see the forward clapback, the mask cannot go back on. And pretending it can is what got the situation to this point in the first place. Now, listen, hear me clearly, because I do not want a single word of this taken out of context. I am not celebrating this story. I am not laughing at anyone in it. I am not one of the noisemakers hoping for a bad ending. I am telling you what people in my inbox, in the comments, in the boxing forums, in the barbershops, and in the sports podcasts are already saying out loud. Because when I do not cover a story, somebody else covers it worse. That is just the social media economy. So I would rather sit here, break it down honestly, and give you the receipts than let 100 bad faith accounts turn this into a circus. And to everybody clapping without thinking, sit with the applause for a second. Because that applause is the fuel. The applause is what keeps every caption coming. The applause is what makes silence feel like weakness. The applause is what makes a hard conversation impossible. So if you actually care, and I mean actually care, be honest instead of loud. Because loudness has never saved anybody from a decision they were determined to make. At the end of the day, everybody involved is going to have their own take. Some will ride with Claressa Shields until the last frame. Some will side with Remy Ma without ever pausing. Some will demand Papoose speak. Some will demand everyone shut up. All of those reactions are valid, and all of those reactions are going to keep pouring in because the story is not slowing down. The story is speeding up. And the closer we get to August 15th, the louder every single caption is going to sound. So tell me right now, and be honest in the comments because I read everyone. Do you think Claressa Shields calling Papoose her hubby is harmless expression? Or do you think it is a public claim that has real consequences attached to it? Do you think the criticism is fair? Or do you think everybody needs to leave her alone and let her live? Drop it below, do not hold back because I want the full temperature of the room on this one. And if you got something out of this breakdown, if any of this made the situation clearer than it was 5 minutes ago, tap that like, hit subscribe, share this with the boxing head in your life who has been asking what is really going on, and turn the notification bell on so you never miss a drop when the next chapter of the story lands, because I promise you another chapter is coming. Thank you for hanging with me through this one. Stay sharp, stay honest, and I will catch you on the next breakdown.